The collapse before renewal is one of the most profound truths of human transformation. Every person who has ever rebuilt themselves has walked through the ruins of their former identity. Before the new self can rise, the old must crumble, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. Collapse is not a failure. It is the soul's way of clearing the ground for something deeper, truer, and more whole. There comes a time in every life when the structures we built, our beliefs, relationships, ambitions, even the image of who we think we are, no longer hold meaning. What once felt solid begins to shake. The plans we made fall apart. We stand at the edge of something unfamiliar, watching the old world dissolve, terrified yet strangely aware that something sacred is happening beneath the surface. In this collapse, the ego panics. It wants to hold on to what was familiar, even if that familiarity caused pain. The mind searches for control, trying to patch what is breaking. But no matter how hard we resist, the deeper current of life continues to move. What breaks is not the essence of who we are. What breaks is the illusion of stability we once mistook for truth. When the false layers fall away, we begin to see the emptiness they covered, a silence, a void, a space that feels unbearable at first. Yet within that silence, something alive begins to stir. The collapse is not destruction in the way the world understands it. It is initiation. An invitation to return to our original nature. We live in a culture that fears breakdowns, that treats them as problems to be fixed quickly. But sometimes the most important work of the soul is done in the ruins. The fall is not a mistake. It is the beginning of transformation. When a tree sheds its leaves, it is not dying. It is preparing for renewal. In the same way, when our identities fall apart, when relationships end, when the ambitions that once fueled us turn to dust, it is often because the old forms can no longer contain our growth. Life demands that we expand, and sometimes expansion looks like collapse. The self that breaks is the self that has reached its limits. It cannot carry us further. In that breaking, we are forced to face what we avoided for years. The fears we buried, the emotions we silenced, the truths we pretended not to know. The collapse strips us of distraction. It leaves us exposed, vulnerable, raw, and because of that, honest. We begin to see ourselves without the filters of success or failure. We begin to realize that our worth was never tied to the outer world. The emptiness left behind becomes a mirror, reflecting everything we tried not to see. Those who rebuild themselves do not do so by escaping the ruins, but by entering them fully. They walk among the ashes, picking up the fragments of what was once their life, examining each piece, asking what still holds truth and what must finally be released. This process is painful, but it is sacred. Each broken piece contains a lesson. Each loss carries a message. The more we listen, the more we understand that what fell apart was never meant to last. The soul uses collapse as a way of releasing us from false attachments, of calling us home to something real. The moment we stop resisting the fall, we begin to sense its hidden order. Beneath the chaos lies a rhythm, an intelligence that knows exactly what it's doing. We realize that collapse is not random, but orchestrated by the deeper self, the part of us that longs for wholeness. It dismantles what no longer serves that purpose. From this place of surrender, a strange peace emerges. We no longer fight to rebuild the old structure. We begin to listen to what wants to be built next. Rebuilding then becomes an act of alignment, not repair. We are not restoring the old house. We are constructing a new one from the foundation of truth. What grows after collapse is not a copy of what was lost, but something entirely new. A version of the self that carries wisdom in its bones and humility in its breath. The person who emerges from the ruins is not the same one who entered them. They have seen the limits of control, the futility of resistance, and the quiet power of surrender. They understand that renewal is not a return to the past, but a resurrection of the soul into a higher state of being. Collapse is the universe's way of freeing us from our own confinement. It strips away everything false so that only what is essential can remain. It breaks us open not to destroy us, but to give life a way in. And though it feels like an ending, it is, in truth, the first breath of beginning. Facing the inner shadow is one of the most difficult yet transformative acts a human being can undertake. Within every person exists a hidden realm, a dark reflection of the self that carries all the impulses, desires, and emotions we deny. It is the part of us we pretend does not exist, the side we hide from others, and even from ourselves. This shadow is not evil. It is simply unacknowledged. It forms from everything we were told was unacceptable. Our anger, jealousy, fear, selfishness, or weakness. Over time, as we repress these parts, they do not disappear. They retreat underground, gaining power in silence, shaping our behavior from beneath the surface. To face the shadow is to turn inward, to look into that darkness without judgment. Most people spend their entire lives avoiding this confrontation. They project their shadow onto others, condemning in the world what they cannot accept in themselves. They see enemies where there are mirrors, monsters where there are merely reflections of their own denied emotions. But every time we refuse to face what we carry within, the shadow grows stronger. It begins to influence our relationships, our decisions, our dreams. It whispers through envy, explodes through anger, and hides behind virtue. It wears masks so convincing that we forget it is us behind them. The shadow is the keeper of everything we have disowned. Yet paradoxically, it also guards our greatest potential. Within the same depths where our fears dwell, lie our creativity, passion, courage, and authenticity. The energy we spend suppressing the shadow is the same energy we need to become whole. Facing it does not mean indulging in darkness, but integrating it. It means seeing those rejected parts with awareness, allowing them to have a voice, and transforming them into conscious strength. When we face the shadow, we reclaim the energy trapped in our denial. That energy becomes fuel for growth. This process begins with honesty. It requires admitting that we are not as innocent, pure, or enlightened as we pretend to be. It requires acknowledging that within us exists the potential for cruelty as well as compassion, for destruction as well as creation. Every saint has a sinner within. Every calm soul carries a storm. When we deny this duality, we remain half alive, living only from the side we deem acceptable. To face the shadow is to step beyond the illusion of perfection and embrace the wholeness of what it means to be human. The journey inward is uncomfortable because the shadow holds not only moral darkness, but emotional pain and memories of humiliation, fear, abandonment, and rejection. When we suppress these wounds, they harden into habits. We lash out, we withdraw, we seek control, or we cling to others, not realizing that the real battle is within. Facing the shadow means revisiting these inner wounds with compassion, not shame. It means listening to the pain rather than running from it, allowing it to tell us what it needs. Every repressed emotion is a part of the self asking to be seen. The world outside mirrors our inner condition. The conflicts we see in society often reflect the shadows of individuals projected on a larger scale. A person who cannot face their own greed condemns the greed of others. One who represses anger becomes controlled by the anger of the world. But when we integrate our shadow, we stop projecting. We begin to see others as mirrors rather than enemies. The outer world starts to calm because the inner war begins to end. Integration is not a one-time event. The shadow never disappears. It becomes a lifelong companion, a teacher that reminds us of our humanity. Each time we face a new challenge or loss, the shadow returns to reveal another layer of ourselves. The goal is not to destroy it, but to dialogue with it, to understand what it needs to reveal. When we make peace with the darkness, we find unexpected light. There is power in the one who knows their own depths. Such a person cannot be easily manipulated because they are no longer afraid of what lives inside them. They have seen their own capacity for both love and destruction, and that awareness gives them balance. They no longer hide behind masks of virtue or false positivity. They move through life with quiet strength because they have accepted what most people run from, themselves. When we face the inner shadow, we retrieve the lost fragments of our soul. We become fuller, deeper, and more authentic. We begin to live from the center, not from reaction. The parts we once feared become sources of wisdom. Our anger becomes clarity, our fear becomes caution, our envy becomes inspiration. By embracing what we denied, we transform darkness into depth and pain into power. In the end, the shadow was never our enemy. It was our teacher, patiently waiting for us to turn and listen. Unavoidable passage in the process of rebuilding oneself. It is the phase where everything familiar disappears, where light seems to fade and silence replaces clarity. This darkness is not merely external. It exists within, in the depths of the psyche where forgotten emotions, broken identities, and hidden fears reside. Most people try to escape this inner night, clinging to distractions, relationships, or illusions of control. Yet, true transformation demands that one walks directly into it. The darkness is not punishment. It is purification. It strips away the superficial, revealing what is essential. It is the crucible in which the soul is reshaped. When a person enters this stage, It often feels as though life has betrayed them. The things that once brought joy lose their meaning. Purpose becomes distant, and every effort to find direction seems to fail. This inner emptiness can feel unbearable. But this emptiness is not a void to be feared. It is a space being cleared for rebirth. The darkness asks for surrender, for the courage to stop running and face what lies beneath the surface. It whispers that the only way out is through. The human tendency is to resist, to seek immediate relief, to return to the comfort of the known. Yet in doing so, one remains trapped in repetition, circling around the same wounds, never breaking free. The journey through darkness reveals the hidden architecture of the soul. It brings forth what has been suppressed for years: grief, anger, longing, shame, emotions buried beneath layers of denial. These emotions rise like ghosts, demanding acknowledgement. Each one carries a story, a truth that was never allowed to breathe. When faced with honesty and compassion, these feelings begin to lose their destructive power. The darkness becomes a mirror reflecting all that we have avoided. It shows us the parts of ourselves that were left behind in the pursuit of perfection. There is a strange wisdom in the darkness. When sight is taken, one learns to see differently, through intuition, through inner sensing. The mind, accustomed to logic and clarity, finds itself powerless here. It must bow to something deeper, something ancient within. The darkness teaches humility. It reminds us that the intellect alone cannot heal the soul. One must feel, endure, and trust the process. Every wound exposed in this stage is an opening through which light will eventually enter. This descent is often accompanied by solitude. People who have not faced their own depths may not understand the silence you seek. The journey is inward and therefore lonely. Yet in that solitude, one meets the truest companion, the self. The voice that was drowned out by the noise of ambition and approval begins to speak again. It is faint at first, fragile like a whisper in the distance. But as one listens, it grows stronger, guiding step by step through the shadows. The darkness becomes less of an enemy and more of a guide. Those who endure this passage emerge with a new kind of strength. Not the brittle confidence that depends on external validation, but a quiet resilience born from surviving their own storms. They no longer fear the night because they have learned that light lives within it. They realize that what seemed like destruction was, in truth, transformation in disguise. The pain that once felt unbearable becomes the foundation of empathy. The confusion that clouded the mind becomes clarity of heart. The darkness did not destroy them. It revealed who they were beneath all illusions. Every great awakening carries within it a period of darkness. Just as the seed must split open in the soil before it can rise toward the sun, the human spirit must break in the unseen before it can grow into its true form. This is why darkness precedes renewal, because only by losing everything false can we find what is real. The one who walks through the inner night without turning back learns that the absence of light is not the absence of life. It is the womb of creation, the place where new beginnings are conceived in silence. The journey through darkness is the soul's initiation. It demands faith without evidence, courage without guarantee, and surrender without control. It tests the core of who we are, asking us to let go of everything we thought we needed to survive. And yet when we do, we discover that something within us cannot be broken. Something eternal waits in that silence, watching, waiting, and when the time comes, guiding us gently back toward the light. Awakening the true self is not about becoming someone new. It is about remembering who you were before the world taught you to forget. From childhood, every person begins as something pure and whole, deeply connected to an inner knowing. But as life unfolds, this natural authenticity becomes buried beneath layers of conditioning, expectation, and fear. Society teaches us how to fit in, how to please, how to hide our vulnerabilities, and how to wear the masks that make others comfortable. Slowly, the real self retreats into silence. We begin to mistake these masks for identity, believing we are the roles we play: the achiever, the helper, the leader, the victim. Yet somewhere within, a quiet voice keeps whispering that something is missing, that beneath all the noise, something essential waits to be remembered. The true self cannot be built from the outside. It is not defined by success, relationships, possessions, or approval. It already exists beneath all these things, untouched and eternal. Awakening. It requires peeling back the layers of illusion that have gathered around it over time. This process can feel like loss because it often means letting go of identities that once gave us security. But what is lost is only falsehood. What remains is real. The awakening begins the moment one dares to question, who am I when I am no longer what the world expects me to be? That question cracks the surface of illusion, allowing light to reach the deeper self that has been waiting in the shadows. To awaken the true self, one must face discomfort. The ego resists, clinging to its constructed image, fearing irrelevance or emptiness. But the awakening is not about ego's death. It is about ego's surrender to something greater. The mind wants control. The self seeks truth. Between the two lies tension, and that tension is the doorway to awakening. In that friction, the false begins to crumble. The ambitions that once defined us lose their urgency, and the opinions of others begin to lose their power. The awakening is rarely dramatic. It unfolds quietly, often during solitude, grief, or deep reflection. It happens when the outer world can no longer distract us from the voice within. The true self does not shout. It whispers. It speaks through intuition, through a sense of calm that defies chaos, through a knowing that needs no justification. It reveals itself not when we strive to become something, but when we stop pretending to be everything. In its presence, we begin to see life differently. The endless chase for validation begins to fade, replaced by a simple desire for authenticity. We start to live not from fear of judgment, but from alignment with truth. This alignment brings peace, not because life becomes easy, but because it becomes real. In awakening, there is a kind of remembering, the recognition of values, dreams and emotions that once felt too fragile to express. The true self carries both innocence and wisdom. It knows pain yet remains open to love. It does not seek perfection but wholeness. It accepts flaws as part of its beauty and contradictions as part of its truth. When we live from this place, we no longer divide ourselves between what we show and what we hide. We begin to integrate, to act from unity rather than fragmentation. The outer life starts reflecting the inner life, and every choice begins to carry meaning. This awakening often leads to a reevaluation of relationships, ambitions, and beliefs. Many things that once mattered begin to fall away. Some people may drift from us because we no longer fit their expectations. Yet this is not loss but liberation. To awaken is to stand alone for a while, not in isolation but in integrity. It is to walk through the world without disguise, knowing that truth is worth more than approval. The awakened self moves through life with a quiet confidence that comes from knowing its own foundation. Awakening also brings responsibility. Once you see yourself clearly, you can no longer act in ignorance. You become aware of how your energy affects others, how your words shape reality, how your intentions create ripples. The awakened self does not seek dominance. It seeks harmony. It acts from awareness rather than reaction. It gives without losing itself and receives without guilt. It learns that fulfillment is not found in control, but in surrender to the flow of life. At its core, awakening is not about reaching a destination, but about returning to presence. It is realizing that everything you were searching for was never outside of you. It was buried beneath the noise, waiting for you to become still enough to hear it. When that realization dawns, life becomes simpler, yet infinitely deeper. You stop striving to become, and you begin to be. The true self emerges not as something new, but as something ancient. Something that has always been there, quietly waiting for you to wake up and remember who you are. Integration, not perfection, is the real goal of personal transformation. To rebuild oneself is not to eliminate flaws or erase contradictions, but to unite them into a living whole. The idea of perfection is an illusion, a mask the ego wears to gain control over uncertainty. Perfection demands uniformity, but life itself thrives on complexity. Within every human being there exists a tension between opposites: love and fear, strength and vulnerability, chaos and order. To live fully is to hold these opposites without being torn apart by them. Integration means allowing every part of yourself a place in the greater harmony of your being, accepting that darkness and light are both needed to form the complete self. The pursuit of perfection often leads to fragmentation. When people try to become flawless, they begin cutting away the parts of themselves that seem undesirable. They silence anger, hide sadness, suppress fear, and deny weakness. They chase an image of who they believe they should be, not who they truly are. This self-editing creates an inner division, a war between the accepted and rejected parts of the psyche. The more one strives for perfection, the more disconnected they become from authenticity. The outer image may appear composed, but inwardly there is conflict, a constant pressure to maintain control, to appear complete while feeling hollow inside. Integration, on the other hand, is freedom from this inner conflict. It invites imperfection to sit at the same table as grace. When a person begins to integrate, they stop fighting their emotions. They learn to observe their anger without shame, to listen to their fear without surrendering to it. They begin to understand that every emotion has a message, a function, a purpose. Anger protects boundaries, sadness opens compassion, fear teaches awareness, and joy reveals connection. None of these are mistakes of nature. They are instruments of balance. Integration transforms what perfection rejects. It takes the scattered pieces of experience and arranges them into meaning. This is not about becoming pure light, but about learning to carry both shadow and light with dignity. The integrated self is not flawless, but it is whole. Such a person does not pretend to be beyond pain or failure. Instead, they embrace both as teachers. They understand that suffering is not a sign of weakness, but part of the process through which wisdom is born. When they fall, they do not collapse into despair, for they know that every descent has a lesson. They no longer seek to escape imperfection, but to learn from it. This acceptance brings peace, not the fragile peace of control, but the steady peace of self-knowledge. Integration also means forgiving the parts of yourself that made mistakes. Many people live imprisoned by guilt, unable to move forward because they cannot release the past. But the self cannot grow in a state of condemnation. To integrate is to make peace with your history, to understand that even the wrong turns were part of the map that brought you here. Every choice, even those made in confusion, carries a fragment of insight that can guide future strength. When forgiveness enters, wholeness begins. Without it, perfection remains a punishment that no one can achieve. The integrated person does not seek approval for being ideal. They earn respect by being real. Their strength comes from honesty, their presence from balance. They can admit their flaws without feeling diminished and express their gifts without arrogance. They do not hide behind personas or chase the illusion of constant positivity. They know that authenticity sometimes looks like silence, vulnerability, or uncertainty. Their worth is not defined by how perfect they appear, but by how deeply they live their truth. Integration also extends beyond the self. When you accept your own contradictions, you become more compassionate toward the contradictions of others. You stop judging people for their chaos because you recognize it as a mirror of your own. You begin to listen without defense, to empathize without losing yourself. This is how inner work transforms the outer world, not through preaching perfection, but through embodying acceptance. A person at peace with their own duality radiates peace outwardly, creating space where others can be honest too. Wholeness does not mean balance that never shifts. It means a dance that continues between the poles of experience. You will always swing between light and dark, joy and sorrow, certainty and doubt. The difference is that now you move consciously, aware that both ends of the spectrum belong to you. Integration gives you the wisdom to navigate life's contradictions with grace, to remain centered amid chaos, and to see that even imperfection carries beauty. To rebuild yourself is to abandon the fantasy of perfection and embrace the reality of being human. It is to realize that every flaw is a doorway to depth, every scar a reminder of survival, and every contradiction a bridge to wholeness. When the fragments of the self are finally gathered, they do not form a flawless sculpture. They form a living soul, imperfect yet complete, wounded yet wise, endlessly growing yet already whole, becoming. The architect of meaning is the final act of rebuilding oneself, the stage where life stops being something that happens to you and becomes something you consciously create. It is not about controlling every outcome, but about shaping your inner world with intention. Every person carries within them the power to give meaning to their experiences, no matter how chaotic or painful. The meaning we choose becomes the structure upon which our future is built. Without it, life feels random and hollow, a series of events without direction. But when meaning enters, even suffering becomes a source of strength, even loss becomes a teacher. The architect of meaning is not a dreamer detached from reality. It is the awakened self, aware that purpose is not discovered by chance. It is built from awareness, choice, and courage. Most people live according to borrowed meanings. They inherit beliefs from parents, culture, or religion, and rarely question whether those meanings align with their inner truth. They follow paths laid out by others, mistaking imitation for purpose. But sooner or later, the soul demands authenticity. It begins to question the borrowed map, asking, "Is this truly mine?" That question marks the beginning of self-authorship. To become the architect of meaning, one must first dismantle everything that was imposed: the expectations, the comparisons, the false definitions of success. It requires standing in the empty space left behind and daring to design a life that reflects your deepest values, not the world's fleeting standards. Meaning cannot be given. It must be made. And it is made through awareness, the ability to look at your life, no matter how fragmented, and see pattern and possibility. Pain without meaning becomes suffering, but pain with meaning becomes transformation. When one begins to interpret experiences not as punishment but as preparation, every struggle starts to serve a higher purpose. This shift in perspective is what allows resilience to grow. Meaning transforms chaos into narrative, turning confusion into understanding and despair into direction. The architect of meaning does not wait for clarity to arrive from the outside. They build it brick by brick, moment by moment, through reflection and choice. To construct meaning, one must accept responsibility. Life may not always give you what you expect, but it gives you the power to decide what it will mean. A failure can mean defeat or discovery. A loss can mean emptiness or awakening. The difference lies in perception. This creative act of assigning meaning is what separates those who crumble from those who rise. The architect understands that reality is neutral until interpreted. They choose interpretations that empower growth, not despair. This is not self-deception. It is spiritual craftsmanship, the ability to mold chaos into coherence. Meaning also arises through contribution. A life centered only on personal gain eventually feels hollow, no matter how successful it appears. The soul finds its deepest fulfillment in giving something back, not out of obligation, but out of alignment with its own nature. Every person carries a unique essence, a kind of inner design that seeks expression. When you live in harmony with that design, even small acts feel significant. The architect of meaning builds not only for themselves, but for others, for the collective good, for the beauty of creation itself. Purpose becomes service, and service becomes joy. The process of building meaning is not linear. There are times when old meanings collapse, when faith fades and purpose dissolves into uncertainty. These moments are not failures, but renewals. Just as a builder must sometimes tear down weak foundations to construct something stronger, the soul must dismantle outdated meanings to evolve. The architect learns to trust this rhythm, the cycles of building, breaking, and rebuilding. They understand that meaning is alive, not fixed. It expands as consciousness expands. To live as the architect of meaning is to live awake. It means choosing awareness over numbness, creation over reaction, depth over distraction. It means asking in every situation, what can this teach me? What truth is hidden here? Such questions turn even suffering into a sacred dialogue. Life stops being a series of accidents and becomes a coherent story, not perfect, but purposeful. The architect of meaning does not seek eternal happiness, but inner coherence. They know that joy and sorrow are both necessary colors in the painting of existence. What matters is not escaping pain, but shaping it into wisdom. Meaning gives us a reason to endure, a reason to grow, and a reason to continue when everything else falls apart. It is the struck